As long as I've been long arm quilting, one thing that still remains is that I have a backlog of quilt tops that I have not finished. This particular one is probably several years old. It was Hoffman Bali tiles. I liked the wood block designs in the batik fabric, and I thought they were really going to pop out, but they really don't show up as much as I was hoping. So today what we're going to do is show a way to quilt this using block patterns, and the way that I'm going to be able to do that is by using a Pantograph Gridz on the back of the machine. The Pantograph Gridz is going to allow me to locate the four corners of each of these blocks, and then I can position my paper block pantos accordingly and quilt these from the back just the way I would a regular pantograph. What I'm going to be using are Urban Elementz block designs. This particular one is called Wisteria block number 3. This is a 9-inch block, and these fabric blocks are 9.5 inches. So I feel like that's going to fill the space really nicely. Alternatively, I could also use some of the block designs from the Urban Elementz club sets. And this is a 9-inch circle, so I'm going to be using this particular design as well. I'm going to combine it with these two. These both have circular elements, and I'm going to use these to quilt the blocks and the Pantograph Gridz to help me locate the blocks on each of the sections. So I'm going to move the camera to the back and get the Pantograph Gridz set up so we can get started quilting this quilt finally. I went ahead and brought this in a little bit closer just so you could see a little better. I wasn't sure if you could see it in the first set, but these are well, that's only an 8-inch block, but this is a 9-inch block, so that design could go here. I also pulled this one out, Fiddlehead block 2. That one would be nice. That's a 9-inch and a 9.5-inch block. And then we have this circular block here. So I'm probably going to play with all three. It doesn't matter to me if the quilting design is different on different blocks. So I'm going to go ahead and move the camera and get that set up. The Pantograph Gridz is what we're going to be using today. That's going to allow us to position these paper blocks on the back of the machine and have them stitch out on the front just the way you would a normal pantograph. The Pantograph Gridz is perfectly printed with a 1-inch, well, it's a 1-inch major grid, and you can see that it has markings at every 1/4 of an inch. The Pantograph Gridz is a one-time purchase, and it's an almost essential tool for doing long-arm quilting, especially if you're using it on the back of the machine. The Pantograph Gridz allows you to mark the two edges of the quilt so you know where your stop and start points are, so that you don't sew off of the quilt and continue sewing onto red snappers or pins that you have basted the edge of the quilt with. It's also used at the top and bottom of the quilt to start the quilt off, if you need to edit the quilt pantograph in any way. You can make markings using a dry erase pen on the Pantograph Gridz. The Pantograph Gridz also protects your pantograph so that you don't have to make any markings on it. It also prevents it from getting any spills on it. I use Command Performance hooks to keep mine in position, and also the Pantograph Gridz helps hold the pantograph flat in the back so that you don't have any misrepresentation from the pantograph rippling as the laser light's reading it. So the Pantograph Gridz is what I'm going to be using today to mark the position of these blocks, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. Okay, we have kind of a funny side view here that's going to allow you both to see where my needle position would be on the block, but also where my laser light is pointing at the back. And I'm going to use this to go ahead and mark the position of each of these blocks on my Pantograph Gridz. That way I can locate the pattern accordingly. So if I take each mark in the back and I just make a little dot where the corner is, as I move the head of the machine, I can get a reading of where that block is. And you might assume that the pieces would all line up to a specific square grid on the Pantograph Gridz, but that's not necessarily true. The reason being is that my blocks may not be square, the quilt may not be loaded perfectly square, the Pantograph Gridz may not be completely level on the machine, so it may not read exactly on straight lines. So that's why it's really great to have an actual representation with the dots. And you can see that this one is off just a little bit from the grid. So if I just solely went on the grid of the paper, the Pantograph Gridz, it might be off on the quilt. So I'll just keep marking these quadrants on my Pantograph grid, and that will give me a placement for this whole row of stitching. And I just have one more block to do, and you can see I'm actually getting off the bottom of the Pantograph grid where it's gridded, but that doesn't matter because I don't need the actual grid to get my placement of the block. It seems like the further I go, the more off the block was, and that could be the way the border was applied. It could be the way that the quilt was attached to the machine. At any rate, I would want all of these blocks to be square with the pattern, so when I take it off of the machine, it's still going to be where it needs to be. Here you can see I already have two of the paper patterns loaded into position. I can see very easily if that needs to be adjusted at all inside the squares. This one's really tight, so it's really important that I get that right into the perfect position. So now that I have this ready, I could go ahead and pull up my thread and get the first one stitched out. I'm going to stitch that one out off camera just to make sure my machine's running all right, and I'll pick you back up when I'm on to the fiddle head on the second block, making sure everything is stitching out properly, because I don't want to embarrass myself on camera. Man, am I glad I did that first one without you. It's cold out here, so my machine was acting up a little bit and I had to rethread the machine a couple times. So glad I did that. I made a little dot here on the start of my design, so that'll tell me where my stop and start is when I get back around, so I don't get confused. What I'm going to do is try and stitch out one half of this design on the back, and then I'll move around to the front of the machine and with the camera so you can see what it looks like from the front and the back. Whenever I'm doing a pantograph, I always am my eyes tracing a little bit ahead of where the laser light actually is, so I see where I'm going. And you'll see that I'm not going to follow this line exactly, and it may look bad from the back, but when you get it in the front, you'll see that it isn't as bad as it looks. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this front, the first half, and then I'll go ahead and move to the back of the front. Just about to my halfway point, so I'm going to go ahead and stop right there. And then I'll move the camera to the front, and that way you can see what it looks like from the front half. Here you can see the design fully stitched out, and you can see that it's very well centered in the block. So now it would just be a matter of repeating this process for each of the blocks on the quilt. I think on the next block I'm going to try the other circular block to see which one I like the best. The leaf one over here I thought was a little bit too tight for this particular one, so I'm not sure I'm going to repeat that. I'm not even sure if it shows up very well on there. But I think I want something a little bit looser. So for the next one I'm going to try the other circular block and see what it looks like. Again, it's not going to bother me personally whether or not these patterns are all the same. I mean, I have probably 50 different block patterns. I could try a different one on each block. But the nice thing about the Pantograph Gridz also, all I have to do is drop a needle in the corner of the block, leave the needle in the machine, in the quilt as I'm rolling the quilt up, and the laser light will take me right back to my markings on the back of the quilt. If I need, or on the back of the pantograph, if I need to go ahead and remark the pantograph, it's easy to wipe off and start over again. So that's pretty much the process of using the blocks with the Pantograph Gridz, and I'm just going to carry on with this, getting some more blocks done. But I'm going to leave some of these blocks undone because I believe next time I'm going to show how to do stencils, how to mark with stencils. I know some people think stencils are just for hand quilting, but we're going to show how to use them for machine quilting as well, even on the long arm. So that's it for today, and we'll see you next time.